An honour to be joined today by Dr. Naledi Pandor, the Foreign Minister of South Africa. And you know, look, to have you here in the Venice of the North, in St. Petersburg here, for the second Russia-Africa summit. I know the last one was 2019. It happens every 4 years. But so much has changed in the past 4 years since the last summit. And here we are on the front lines of what is a burgeoning multipolar world. And Minister Pandor, I will get to that eventually at some point. But from all of us here at RT International, from all of us here, we are so grateful for your time that you're sitting down with us today. Thank you very much for joining us here. I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, of course, it's the Africa Summit with Russia here in St. Petersburg. And I'm very glad that South Africa, of course, is being represented here. But why? What are your expectations for this summit? And what's the mission of South Africa for this?
Well, I suppose there are many strands to the expectation. Firstly, it is to continue the relationship that has been built up over many years between Africa and Russia. It's a very important relationship for us, particularly South Africa, given the role that the people of Russia played in our own struggle for freedom. So it's a relationship of brother and sister, of comrade and friend. It's to continue that.
Yes.
Then the second would be to continue to establish strong bonds in advancing the development goals of the African continent and to ensure that the commitment that Russia has both illustrated and expressed over many years continues to be given practical effect by the programs that we agree together and their actual execution. Then the third strand is, of course, people-to-people exchanges. We share much of an interest in the creative arts, in history, in a range of core policy areas, security, trade. So really looking at quite a wide spectrum of areas of partnership is really the rationale for our presence. And perhaps fourth and most important, and I'm really glad that President Putin has agreed to this, is to continue the discussions we began earlier this year about Africa playing a role in seeking a peaceful outcome to the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So I would anticipate that our leaders will use their presence here in St. Petersburg to continue that early discussion, which at the first flush was really to start talking between Africa, Russia, Africa and Ukraine, and hopefully now to start talking about next stages.
Minister, how did that go when the African delegation went to Kiev with the African Peace Initiative? As I understand, the leadership in Kiev wasn't entirely optimistic, but I wasn't there. I wasn't on the ground, but I know the African delegation pitched its peace proposal for the conflict in Ukraine. What were the reactions? What can you tell us?
Well, I think the lines of communication are open with both leaders. Both leaders are strong leaders, so I don't think it was just Ukraine that was tough. I think President Putin was tough as well. But what was very positive was the reception that the African leaders received and an openness to listening to what they're presenting. And as I say, at this particular summit, a readiness to continue that discussion.
I see.
And that's extremely important because remember that we're the first group of leaders who have this access to both leadership of Ukraine as well as of Russia. Others have created such an atmosphere of hostility. They can only speak to one and not the other.
That's right.
So I think Africa is in a unique position to play a very important role.
I think it is in a very unique position, especially with this burgeoning multipolar world as well. I've spoken to various people, heads of state from Africa, who have talked about the United Nations. It needs to be reformed.
Absolutely.
It's a bit outdated, perhaps, these days. African countries, it's only fair that they get equal representation at the United Nations, and there are calls for the UN to be reformed. What do you think is it that African nations, and particularly South Africa, can bring to the table at the UN, for example, when it comes to balancing this multipolar world and giving Africa its fair place on the stage? What can your continent, do you think, bring to the UN and perhaps suggest for some sort of renovation there in New York?
As you would know, South Africa went through a very terrible and torrid time of apartheid. We were oppressed by a minority oppressing a majority. We waged a heroic struggle against might, and so we have experience of dealing with unfairness. And much of the world actually supported the apartheid state for a very long time, and it was very few friends who stood with us as we waged this torrid battle. So I think our experience of oppression makes us a very good candidate for understanding the meaning of freedom, for promoting democracy in its full meaning, and for supporting representativity. Part of the political definition that we give to ourselves as South Africans is unity in diversity. This means we reject racism and all forms of prejudice. And I think we should bring that into the multilateral stage. When we speak of United Nations Security Council reform, what we're speaking of is greater representation, democratic processes. The Security Council has failed the world because we have so much conflict all over the world. So it means the mechanism needs to be rethought so that we can ensure peace and security. We believe that the United Nations remains the premier multilateral institution, and we wouldn't like to see any other attempt to build a global multilateral body. What we'd like to see is reform and strengthening of the UN. From time to time, the United Nations has been used for political ends. It's been made a weapon by some against others. We have to end that. And I think having a diversity in its structures and mechanisms, allowing for democratic processes. So, for example, suddenly, in the context of this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the General Assembly has been given a sort of deciding role. But in norm, it doesn't have that role. So I hope changes of that nature will be continued into the future to give a real meaning to the General Assembly and not to have this notion that there are 15 countries that are able to determine the fate of the world. So that is what we hope for. There are signs, indeed, as you said, that the world institutions are upended, that we may be seeing a global remaking, of multilateral institutions and processes. I hope that will happen. And I think Africans must not miss this moment, because it's probably once in a lifetime. And if we miss it, I'm not sure the opportunity will come very soon once more.
The word pressure that has come up in this conversation. There have been some people, for example, some top officials in Moscow that did say that some African state leaders have received pressure from certain professional partners in the West not to attend this Russia-Africa summit here in St. Petersburg. I don't know if any of that's true, but I have read the reports of this. Has South Africa received or been under any pressure from certain professional partners not to attend this summit? Or any of your neighboring countries, did they find themselves under any pressure not to attend this summit here in St. Petersburg?
You would know South Africa is a country that doesn't accept being pressured by anyone. So I think friends have learned over time that they need to be rather judicious with us. So no, there's not been any such approach. And of course, should it ever occur, I'd make it absolutely public. So I think when we speak of developing a backbone, we each have spines, and it must be your spine that is strong. So I think it is time that our continent realize that it has the possibility of being an extremely powerful part of the world. And we need to be far more in control of our own capabilities, our resources, and we should manage them to the interest of the African continent and not have this notion that we owe someone something, because that's the neo-colonial ideal. So I think we need to begin to understand our own power and to use it to good effect for Africa.
When you say that Africa should be in charge of its sovereignty, it should be in charge of its infrastructure, its mineral resources, for example, who is in charge of that now? Is it not Africa?
It's a range of forces. I think there are private sector companies, there are countries that abuse the resources of Africa. This is well known, it's recorded. You can speak to intelligence sources. Africa exports its mineral resources raw. It doesn't refine on the continent. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which seeks to increase intra-African trade. But in terms of industrialization, very few African countries are at the level that they are significantly productive in manufacturing terms. This must change. I think it's well understood that even those who claim to be our friends have really exploited the resources of the continent. And, colonialism was about mineral resources, was about extraction, but no oppressor will change your situation of oppression. It is you who are oppressed who must change it. So I think we need to develop a different relationship with our resources, manage them ourselves, develop the ability to be innovative, use partnerships, such as a partnership with Europe or the United States or Russia, for our interests and not the interests of others.
Meantime, you have countries like China that's been investing in infrastructure in Africa, whether it's roads or schools, clinics, hospitals, electricity, as I understand. Russia has been investing in nuclear energy across the African continent. I believe, in fact, up in Egypt, there are several now nuclear facilities in their final stages. China and Russia investing in this way in Africa, can it be said that our professional partners in Europe or the United States are also investing in the same kind of perhaps humanitarian aspect as some of these other Eastern partners might be?
I've been very categoric in statements I've made previously, that one of the features of our own political practice is we seek to be non-aligned. So we don't attach to a particular country, because that's very dangerous. We had that during what was called the Cold War, and as Africa, we suffered immensely from being seen to be attached to the West or elsewhere. And so I have been extremely judicious and careful about asserting our independence. It's very, very important. China is a very good friend to us as South Africa and to the African continent. I can see the change in infrastructure in several countries across the continent. But I still know, as an African who is honest, who analyzes, that we're not yet where we are. And I think that the element of change that must occur is proper control of our resources, is ensuring value addition, is ensuring we do not export raw and buy back value added at very high prices, ensuring we value add and sell as goods. So we need to change the African condition. And I have no fear about saying we change it, whoever the friend is. And this is very important, because my interest is our continent, is our people. And whoever seeks to exploit us and to diminish our ability, whoever they be, whether they claim to be friend or not, we must deal with them.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and maybe 40 other countries, Minister, looking to join the BRICS strategic partnership, this strategic alliance that is it's growing legs faster than many people even imagined. Over recent years, BRICS was a nice idea. The Avon Investment and Infrastructure Bank, for example, the New Development Bank as well. The BRICS, it was a great idea, and then it kind of went a bit quiet for a few years, or perhaps a bit behind the scenes. But now look what's happening to BRICS. Minister Pandor, every week there's a new development with the BRICS family. More and more countries looking to join. It's almost like a new front line of being a pioneer, I think. As China said when Xi Jinping was in Moscow a few months ago, we are witnessing the biggest changes in 100 years, and Russia and China are driving these changes. Now, that's what he said. But look at the BRICS, Minister. Or this coagulation of very strategic countries around the world, whether all these countries want to join, Saudi Arabia wants to join, for example, energy-rich nations want to join, nations representing the labor workforces of the world want to join, nations representing the most geostrategic ports want to join. Minister Pandor, what does BRICS mean today for this world that's been so set with a Western hegemon? And now we're looking at what is this sudden growth in this multipolarity. Minister, what is going on with BRICS? It's a big part of you and your country as well.
Absolutely. We're discussing expansion, which is very exciting. But I think really well done to BRICS on the New Development Bank. It's a bank that is working. We have very positive rating in the world financial rating terms. And we've made significant contributions to infrastructure investment and support in the post-COVID era to all the BRICS member states. And what is fantastic, we've grown from the 5 to 3 additional members, so we're now 8. And my anticipation is more will join the bank as more members come on. But of course, the decision of expansion is not mine. It will be the heads of state in August who will determine. We've done our work as the foreign ministers and have developed a clear set of guiding principles which we think will assist our leaders as they make a decision. But why? Why do people want to be part of BRICS? BRICS is a fresh forum. It's progressive in ideals. It seeks to focus on peace, security, and development. We're not standing against anyone. We're not standing for anybody. We work for the good of the world. And I think you need a body of that nature. So everybody is interested in BRICS because they can see something different is happening. We're not seeking to weaponize the oceans. We're not seeking to weaponize the forests. We're not seeking to weaponize climate change. We want to work in concert to address key development issues. And I think that is the attraction that BRICS has for so many countries. I'm actually spending a lot of my time having to reply to countries that want to know when.
I can only imagine. The interest is growing by the day. Like I said, Minister, every week there's a new development with the BRICS family, and there's so many dozens of countries looking to join. I have to ask you this. Professionally and personally, I find it a fascinating story. The BRICS summit is in August, and there's an awful lot of talk. There's an awful lot of talk, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's an awful lot of talk about a potential BRICS currency, a commodity-backed currency or a gold-backed currency. Now, personally, my opinion is things like this take an awful lot of time, an awful lot of time. If you look at the European Union, how many countries have to settle on a euro, for example, and these big disparities between smaller economies and bigger economies, it's complicated. But some people are talking about the BRICS R5 currencies, the renminbi, the real, the rupee, and so forth. A lot of people out there are hopeful for an announcement about this possible new currency at the summit in August. Is there anything, Minister, you can tell us?
Well, I understand the president of the New Development Bank is going to address the leaders on this very subject, and we hope she'll give us some sense of what the future looks like. I do think we need to have greater fairness in world trade, and we need to ensure, again, that financial systems and institutions are not politicized to a level that they become a barrier to trade. So having greater diversity is extremely important, because once you attach to one currency or one system, you then become somewhat of a hostage. And that's what we've got to end. We have to have fair trade, proper systems, financial security, but you can't be tied to one. And the moment is probably now to consider alternatives. So I'm hoping that we'll get direction from the BRICS summit. But I believe this is something that is not the expertise of ministers of foreign affairs. That's why we'll rely on the president of the bank and eventually the finance ministers of BRICS to give us a sense of what is possible. But as I said, given the whirlwind in the world today, the moment for change is now. The moment to consider new is now.
I was going to ask you, okay, yes, there is whirlwind in the world today. I get that. There are hot spots and conflict zones, but why? Why is now such a good time for change, do you think, Minister?
Well, I think for the first time, the hostility between nations and between powerful forces in the world has come out into the open. The trade war between the United States and China, two very big powers in the world, is out in the open. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, the role of NATO within it. So suddenly, very powerful elements are facing each other. And we are going to have to find answers in that context. And the answers are not going to be what we know. The answers have to be a refresh, in my humble opinion.
There's so much movement in the world today when you talk about the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the ASEAN, the Global South, of course, the African continent. Some people refer to these groups as a de-dollarization coalition. They're moving away from the American dollar. Now, yes, it's been the reserve currency essentially since the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War, but countries are diversifying away from the dollar. They're increasing trade in national currencies. It's almost like every week, Minister, we have a new development with new countries coagulating together to form this de-dollarization coalition. Why is this happening, and why now?
Well, I think part of it is that there's this sense, as I said, of being held hostage and a desire to be free from such a feeling. I notice you mention all the regions, but you don't mention Africa. And it's very, very important that you do factor us in, because we're an incredibly important part of the world. And of course, we hold those important mineral resources which are of such significance to ongoing world development. So don't factor Africa out. It's critical that you don't. Nevertheless, I do feel that one has to be judicious or careful about having too many organizations, because then you lay the basis for conflict rather than for cooperation. So I think a point will have to come where these various organizations actually speak to each other about a convergence and how that is arrived at. And I believe BRICS might be a very important vehicle for such a convergence.
Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to say. I mean, for example, like when I say the Global South, I'm certainly not omitting the Africa at all. When I say BRICS, I'm also talking about Africa in a very big way, because I read a report from Moscow the other day. Now, maybe I'm wrong, Minister, but I read a report that said every African nation has been invited to join BRICS. Do you know about that?
No.
This is not true?
No, we don't invite to join. At the moment, we do have an outreach component of the BRICS activities. The outreach includes invitations to heads of regional organizations worldwide, as well as normally if South Africa is the chair, to all African leaders. So we have invited the heads of state, as well as heads of regional bodies such as the Gulf Council, ASEAN, and so on. So this is a normal process that all of us follow when we are chair of the BRICS forum.
When it comes to the Russia-Africa summit happening for the next few days here in what we like to call the Venice of the North here in St. Petersburg, and it's such a beautiful city, and it's a great time of the year. It's a bit cloudy today, admittedly, Minister, but it has been a beautiful summer so far. This is one of those rare opportunities to get people to the same table, to get everyone under the same canopy to discuss common goals. Can you give me a little teaser as to Are there any surprises or secrets in your back pocket that you want to unveil at this summit? Any major concerns, any new plans, any new initiatives that perhaps you can just give me a secret little hint as to what might be coming up?
Foreign ministers always have secrets in their back pockets.
I'm sure.
No, I think that, the world is at a worrying moment, and I don't want to underplay the threat that faces us as the global community if we're unable to resolve current challenges. We are worried as the continent on the issue of food security, for example. So the grain initiative is very important, and we would want to see this resolved in a manner that addresses both the concerns of Russia as well as the concerns of the African continent. So these are issues that we would like to have greater deliberation on. I often raise this concern about grain exports with my colleagues and about the impact of unilateral sanctions, which are sanctions that don't come through the United Nations system, but are imposed by individual countries on other countries. And when I tell friends that these unilateral sanctions always have awful secondary effects, particularly for developing countries, they say to me, but we don't have sanctions on food. We don't have sanctions on this. And I say, but we are feeling the impact. So I do think we need to resolve all the issues related to matters of food security. And that would be part of, I think, the more important sideline discussions that will take place here. I also think matters of trade are going to enjoy a great deal of prominence. And increasingly, issues of digital economy, digital security are becoming global matters that we have to have some agreement on because, to stop cyber attacks, to ensure cyber security, we have to cooperate, we must share resources. So those would be important discussions. I see our security advisors are meeting, so we look forward to hearing what comes out of their deliberations as well. And all of us have fairly large business delegations, so hoping that some contracts will be signed.
When you talk about the Black Sea Corridor, the grain initiative, as I understand, Moscow has said that the grain initiative has only been temporarily suspended. It has not been closed, and the Kremlin has said that it is open to find a way to further negotiate the resumption of the grain passage in the Black Sea Corridor. Naledi Pandor, the Foreign Minister of South Africa, I could talk to you all day. It's been so enlightening, really fascinating, and we're so proud to have you here in St. Petersburg for this summit. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.